half a millennium, humanity has lived among the stars in darkness. Humans reached the stars long ago, building a republic of high technology and universal emancipation. Then they fought over it, squandered it, and finally lost it. Now a new dark age has descended upon humanity, for the greatest of civilizations has fallen, leaving ignorance and fear scattered among the ruins of many worlds. Even the stars are dying. Then from the ashes of our ruin, Vladimir halted our decline. Proclaimed emperor by popular decree, he united the known worlds of human space under his cunning and charismatic rule. Vladimir created the Great Charter, declaring how the powers of rulership would be divided and how his successors would be elected. 5 scepters from Mother Church, protector of our souls. 5 for the Merchant League, heralds of our past. And 5 for the noble houses, holders of our future. But each of these powers wished to rule it in their own way, and schemed to gain complete power at any price. Vladimir's military might convinced the noble houses to concede his rule, for they could not stand in battle before this master tactician. The Merchant League, last remnants of the Second Republic, made little pretense of their disdain for the charter of Vladimir, but they accepted his rule nonetheless. Fearful of his popularity among the people, the Patriarch of the Universal Church accepted Vladimir's rule on the condition that the Church present him the crown, thus ensuring their ritual role in approving all his successors. Vladimir's coronation as the first emperor of the known worlds took place on Byzantium Secundus, which had been declared the imperial throne world. In the year 4550 AD, Vladimir crowned himself with his own hands and died. An agonizing death at the hand of unknown powers. With Vladimir's death, his great union fell apart. Noble house turned on noble house, igniting a war for the spoils of Vladimir's empire. The commonwealth of humanity was shattered, overcome by iron-fisted feudal lords. As the suns fade, so dies humanity's hope.
I used to have Mac problems.
Hello, everybody out there. The great patriarch is currently dealing with a wall of fire that someone has cast upon him, or firewall problems, this may be. But
I'm here. I just can't see the chat because I can't get into Twitch yet.
He's twitchy normally, and apparently there is a Hazat psychic martial artist dervish in chat after all to save us from these Kurgan barbarians. Evil, evil Kurgans. So, I hope everything is sounding good to you today. We've been messing around with sound, and we're expecting some transmissions from the Fading Suns today. So we'll let you know when we start picking these up. Give us a quick shout in chat if we are coming through loud and clear to you. Right. So today we're going to focus again on the Fading Suns and one of our favorite topics, the monsters of science fiction. We had a classic book come out from the Lord Urbian, the great Trustnicron explores his writings on the stellar bestiary. Of course, we educated known worlders don't believe most of what's in here. We know far better. But those semi-barbaric Trustnicrons, I mean, they're not fully barbaric like the Kurgans, especially not those Kurgans in chat. But maybe we'll have some new news of monsters and such to enjoy. So, and right now I'm taking a break from Cove Aid, which is happening on Twitch. It's a benefit going on online for essential responders, nurses, doctors, and families that have been impacted by the COVID virus. So if you're interested, you can check out Cove Aid for a lot of celebrity gaming when you're done with this one. But, Patriarch, what news is there from the Fading Suns? I hear that people got their own hands on all sorts of fascinating tomes of lore.
All the backers got text files for the core books and the faction book. And I've already seen some errors, of course, that they've been putting up, which is great. It helps fix the books. And so I'm sure a lot of them have had a chance to read through them and might have some questions. Like I said, I can't seem to get into Twitch, so I can't see the chat. So you'll have to let me know if people have any questions on there.
So I will go ahead and keep turning my head to the side to check chat. And
I'm also apparently echoey.
Yep.
I'm going to change microphone too.
Actually, I think it's coming through my end. I've been going with this mic and no headset setup. Oh, neither of us are doing headsets today. How very weird.
Yeah.
Wow, going back in time. But I think we're channeling some figure from the Outer Darks. Or some figure from the Outer Darks is trying to be channeled.
Mike?
Well, we'll see if we get him or not. So, tell us what all some of the Kickstarter backers should have been receiving already.
Well, so far it's the core books and the faction book as text files. The art isn't ready yet, thanks to this whole COVID nightmare we're all going through. So everybody who backed the books got those files to be able to check them out and start playing the game. I also got a character sheet. And so the core books are the universe book, which gives you the setting, the character book, which tells you all about making characters and the rules for doing it, and for playing the game too, and the Game Master book, giving a sample setting and all sorts of stuff for Game Masters. And the faction book gives you the minor guilds, the sects, the pagans, the aliens, and the changed.
Oh my goodness. Hey, I believe someone must have heard my my slanders on Lord Urbian, because it's his descendant, Sir Robert Howard Trustnicron, has just beamed in to complain, I think. Lord Urbian was, of course, the...
But we can't hear him.
No audio.
He is muted.
Whew, I was afraid he was going to tell me a few choice words for me.
Can anyone receive my transmission?
Oh my goodness.
My ship is heavily damaged. I'm sorry I'm late. We ran into problems with the Void Kraken in hyperspace. It's dangerous out here, man.
Now that's
How y'all doing?
That's a Trustnicron adventure if I've ever heard one.
We barely made it. We're flying on fumes right now, but I think I got the comm system working. Let me see if I can get these cameras online.
Your camera's online. We can see you, and you're less fuzzy than usual.
Excellent.
Oh, man, I need a beard.
I trimmed my beard this morning. That might be the reason why.
Somebody give me a quick beard. Here, I'll just sit like this for the rest of the conversation. How's that?
I'm gonna try to do something in the background here while I'm talking about. How y'all doing?
They're even bristling their beards at me in chat. I don't have a beard to bristle back. You two bristle your beards at chat for me, would you?
It's a competition to see who can grow the longest beard, and I think the patriarch is winning. Did you folks say something of a less than kind nature regarding my descendant, Lord Erbion?
It was your descendant.
Excuse me, my
Are you
ancestor.
back in time? Oh my gosh!
No, I'm a
This is getting
ghost. Where am
crazier.
I? Were you talking about my ancestor, Lord Erbion? What were you all
It was
discussing?
the patriarch who was slandering him, not me. I swear.
I said no such thing.
My family's been doing the best we can. Every 10 years, we've been trying to release a new edition of the Stellar Bestiary, and I'll admit, we're not always able to come through. Sometimes the book is banned. Sometimes there's a problem with shipping. Sometimes void krakens. I never quite know what's going to happen. But I am here to converse with you today on this subject of great import.
We do appreciate it. In chat, they think that your problems are just the Sothorists being Sothorists. So.
No, the
that
Saphra
name.
dampener, I assure you, is on full force. I'm going to make sure my palate doesn't go all loopy in the brain pan.
Oh, great. For those of you who don't know who we have on chat with us, this is one of our great Fading Suns writers, and he's a great all-around gaming writer. Brian Campbell, do you want to introduce
Thank
yourself
you
and
so
tell
much.
folks a little
That's
bit about your
very kind of you.
background?
I will drop the ridiculous accent and apologize to anyone who has an accent that's more authentic than mine. Can you still see me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So I have been working on role-playing games, believe it or not, almost 30 years now. I've worked on a wide range of games. On Fading Suns in particular, I've done a number of adventures. There's one for Complete Pandemonium, where it was called a Healing Draft. There was one from Into the Dark. There was a write-up for the Scravers. In the newest edition of the rulebook, there's some incredibly purple prose regarding husks. And I did up some critter stats, which I think is part of the reason why I'm here talking to you right now.
About
Well, that, and you've also been involved in some other great projects, MMOs among others.
That's true. I was a narrative designer on Guild Wars and Guild Wars 2 and WildStar and a lot of fine stuff. So I've been in a wide range of game industries, but I always seem to come back to tabletop because I enjoy it so much.
Spent some time with our friends at Pathfinder.
Yes, I was working on Paizo stuff for a while, the Pathfinder adventure trading card game. Got to work with Mike Selinker on that. We also
Mike's
worked
great.
together on Betrayal at House on the Hill. It's a long list of games.
The Trail House on the Hill is one of my favorite board games the past few years.
Yeah, it's a fantastic game.
And
Fading Suns version.
yeah, exactly. Even
I
worked
would
with
love to see Fading Suns version.
Betrayal and Spaceship and Trustacron Space. I like it. And even been with Nintendo. And
Yes,
you're
I
the source
have.
of some of my favorite. Hello,
Has someone else arrived?
Bill. What happened to your video?
You don't see me? I think you're sharing a screen, or somebody's sharing a screen.
Somebody's sharing screen. Oh,
So-
Brian, did you just hit share screen?
I am
Yes,
trying
you did. We are seeing your car. There we go.
You're seeing my car? What?
Pretty nice
Okay.
wheels.
One
there
moment, I'll be
for
right back.
Trustacron. You need a flitter.
Can you see my car now?
Now I can see you.
And by the way, Brian, Phantom Truth said there's nothing wrong with purple prose.
I
it is my-
appreciate that.
It is the princess's favorite color as well, so we'll be safe on that count. So I was just saying that Brian's also responsible for some of the best stories from the White Wolf days.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you.
We would do assassin games, and he shot me down in the toy aisles of a mammoth store while I was trying to buy my own gun.
Guess what I have here at my.
Of course,
Oh,
always
geez.
at the ready. He was far more
You
prepared.
gotta
than
have
I.
a nerf.
And if you've heard me tell the story of Squawky, our favorite
Good Lord.
pigeon, Brian is the main part of that. I will not tell that one on the air, but if you've heard
That's a
me talk
long
about
story.
it,
That's a long trip.
yeah. What a long, strange Squawky that was. Anyway, I wanted to talk about monsters in science fiction.
Sure.
Because one of the theories of science fiction is that the very first science fiction novel was also a monster novel called the Old Testament. I mean Frankenstein. So I've always been partial to that theory myself, that really that is the first work of science fiction, and in many ways sets the theme for what's to come with science fiction. It's not just dealing with science, but it's dealing with the results of how we interact with changing technology. And of course, there's more science fiction than that, but that's one of the core aspects to me, one of the core aspects of the Fading Suns and so forth. So I wanted to start with Frankenstein and throw it out to you two, whether or not you feel a science fiction story and how that has remained applicable through the years.
Bill, do you want to go first?
I always consider it more of a proto-science fiction story because it's from that era where the demarcating line between science and the occult wasn't so firm. You know, Newton himself was an alchemist, and the science in Frankenstein is much more about alchemy and that strange, in what everybody believed about vitalism at the time, and what electricity was all about. So it's not actually going into any science per se. It still has all that, the mythology around what these things are about. So I think it's really right at the door to science fiction, but I'm not sure it itself fits the description as the first science fiction. But it's tough when you get to work like that because there's horror in there too, and dicing up these genres is always a little hard when you're talking about these classics.
What about you, Two Gun?
Well, I'm going to take a contrasting viewpoint. I would certainly qualify it as a science fiction story. I would say that it's a cautionary tale. It's a story of what happens when science overreaches itself. Science goes wrong. I think this is the point at which someone says, there's always one guy in the discussion who tries to correct someone else because someone claims that the monster's name is Frankenstein, and Frankenstein is the name of the scientist, not the monster. So I think it's as much a story about Frankenstein's creator or resurrector as it is about the monster itself. And it's really staggering how much has changed between the time that Mary Shelley wrote her original version of that story and how many times it's been rewritten and adapted and eventually changed into its Universal monster movie form. So go ahead and put me in the column of considers this science fiction, and also ripping good yarn with plenty of good material to adapt to various role-playing games.
Yep, and I remember the very first Frankenstein movie they ever made, Young Frankenstein, before he grew up with the full Frankenstein. Anyway.
Yeah, the best musicals ever made.
But one thing I like about touching on Frankenstein today is the way that monster still kind of serves in many ways as a archetype for monsters in science fiction through the eras. I mean, Star Trek loved the idea of the misunderstood monster. But by the same token, one of the great things about the novel was that this misunderstood, could have been wonderful creature ended up being really reprehensibly evil in the end as it tracks down and kills everyone in its creator's family. Spoiler alert! Too soon, huh?
Mm-hmm. And of course has to later come back in a comic book as a detective like solve crimes, right? It's the kind of perennial character that you could bring back and reboot for just about any genre.
Well, at least the monster redeemed himself when he teamed up with Dracula, the Wolfman, and others to be a monster squad of detectives.
Also did a good job of taking care of that pernicious Abbott and Costello.
Yeah, I was
the
watching
real threat to us.
The play with Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller, and there was no Abbott and Costello in that anywhere. I don't know what was going on.
Where's the comic relief I expect from a
exactly?
So the Caliph tells us interplanetary voyage narratives go back to ancient times, but based upon myth and occult rather than rational materialistic science. That's why I have to leave them out of the science fiction. And then you read Daniken and Chariot of the Gods, and the follow-up, Hot Rods of the Gods. You know the real truth.
When you're speaking of Hot Rods of the Gods, are you referring to the Ghostbusters RPG adventure?
Written by that famous writer, Daniel Greenberg.
Man, that was a good game.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was a
I would
good
love
game.
to see that game relaunched.
That'd be great.
Heck of a
Very
license now.
approachable game.
That'd be a great license now to do stuff in, though. You get some
Yeah.
incredible characters. And great monsters. And that brings us back to the topic we're talking about today. So let's talk about some of the creatures in Fading Suns. Brian, you want to tell us
Yes.
a little about the husks?
Ah, you brought up one of my favorite subjects, and I'm supposed to downplay it and say that I know zombies are played out, and I know there are people who are tired of zombies. And at the same time, I think one of the reasons a lot of us keep going back to horror stories is, we want to see something new, but we want to see something familiar. So there are certain tropes you expect to see in a zombie story, but at the same time, you're hoping for a new interpretation. And one of the things I like about the interpretation of husks in Fading Suns is it's more than just a combat encounter, which I think is going to be a recurring theme in this discussion that we're having today, where it's like it's not just a roll to see whether you can shoot a zombie in the head. There's a reason why the zombie is there. And those of you who have been going through the PDFs of the book may have seen a paragraph about the idea of plagues, where there is an event that spawns this resurrection of the dead, and it's often linked to some act of blasphemy or heresy or antimony. So one way to solve the problem is the brute force method of, if we just have enough bullets, we can solve this, which is not a great solution. But if you can find the source of what caused this uprising and perhaps do some kind of ritual, something involving the eschatonics or some kind of orthodox ritual, depending on the circumstance, you can track this down to the source and have some form of absolution for the sinners who first caused it, or some way of redressing an injustice. So I think in that respect, that type of zombie story is a lot like, we could go off on a tangent about ghosts, but it's the same sort of thing where there is a lingering reason why this memory of the past persists. And so instead of trying to escape it, we have to address it and resolve it. And I think that's good storytelling.
And one of the things that I love about husks, one of our earliest discussion about husks back in Fading Suns first edition, was the idea that we call them husks. They are representative of the emptiness within us and the emptiness in space and the darkness in space. So whereas zombie just implies now, the idea of husks is something greater, which we tried to focus on. Now Kane 3366 says we're not tired of zombies. We love zombies.
Well, good.
But I don't watch those movies.
I'm going to get in some trouble.
So
I had to
here we
just
go.
tell an
Contrasting
author
opinions go.
Yeah, I had to tell an author to cut some husks because we've got too many husks. Everybody wants to put husks in stories, which is great. But then they're going to get tiresome. You got to dole them out only a little bit here and there and stuff. If the dead are always rising, then why isn't everybody tasked with taking out the dead?
You see, though, that's something we never officially said. We never officially said these are animated corpses, unless you have that in the new version.
No, we do at times. They don't always have to be animated
exactly.
corpses, but a lot of times they do rise up. It's your beloved loved ones.
Exactly.
We're starting to walk again because somebody screwed up somewhere with either blasphemy or weird science or whatever. And they're great, but there's a tendency, I think, in which, especially these days with zombies everywhere, to make them a go-to, and we just have to be a little careful with it sometimes, make sure it fits the whole theme and stuff.
I think there are a few ways to address that. One of them is that one of the things in the write-up for Huss is you sort of did a shtick where Hunter the Reckoning did the same sort of thing, where like not all zombies are killed the same way for a start. Like it might not be that a headshot's what you want to go for. There might be something arcane that you need to put them down. Right. And one of the things I like about the way that critters are written up in Fading Suns in general is that when there's a specific stat block, it's an instance of one iteration of that creature from one world. So the way it manifests on one world or under one set of circumstances might be different than the way that it manifests on another world. If you've played third edition of Dungeons and Dragons, we had this mechanic called templates, where like you had those core stats for a monster, but if you wanted to adapt it to a different circumstance, you put a template on it, and then it becomes a different encounter. And the strategy you thought that was strong before might not work now. For something like zombies, which are a very horror story-based encounter, it switches up a bit, because if horror is predictable, if you know how to defeat the monster, if you're that kid who memorized the monster manual to figure out the weakness of everyone, the game isn't scary anymore, right? So being able to switch up the stats, being able to switch up the circumstances and the location means that I completely agree with the fact that there's a limit to the number of zombie encounters you want to have. But if you're going to have more than one, it's always possible to change the venue or the details to keep that thing unexpected so that the fear of the unknown that you need for a good horror story is there.
Yeah, I played with this a bit with the Husks. I don't think we ever officially said they were animated corpses or the risen dead, because I've had fun with it where you could find the party would be Husks. You'd walk in and battle your doppelganger selves. So you're seeing essentially your undead you coming towards you. So they can come in all sorts of flavors and varieties. And don't be afraid to mix them up. In fact, Phantom Truth says that he was linking Romero back into the Husk, and now he has an idea of how to work a Husk outbreak. Kane3366 says, very true, one of the wonderful things about Fading Suns is the sheer amount of varied potential of story hooks and creatures. The Caliph says, empty people like empty shells of clip-off. Caliph, you're revealing a bit too much of the universe here.
Someone's been reading the Dark
Phantom
Tome.
Truth, in fact, says, I like that clipothic angle, so watch out, y'all, in Phantom Truth's game. The clip-off are coming. So let's talk about that more. We take classic horror and it goes into science fiction and it changes. Frankly, I think that the Alien series became something very different by being in a science fiction setting than it ever could have been in a modern setting. It was able to take on some deeper themes and made Ripley a much more interesting character. What do you think? What happens to monsters when you put them in a science fiction setting?
Well, part of it is that the solution for dealing with the monster may be very well a rational one instead of being a supernatural one, right? Your set of tools isn't something that's something that only one person in the party can understand because they're the mystic. It's something that anyone who understands science and reason can deal with. You mentioned that Aliens is inherently a science fiction story, but one of the things I love about that movie is I think I've seen that movie adapted to more role-playing games than just about any other movie I can think of besides like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars.
You know it's a good game when Game Over, man. Game Over
right,
comes
exactly.
out.
Everyone wants to do the quotes from Aliens during the adventure, and it doesn't matter where it's like, oh, some dwarves went into a mine and they're trying to find the Arkenstone, and we haven't heard from them, so you guys need to tool up and go down there. It's like I've been to a lot of conventions where I sit in on like some 4-hour RPG tournament adventure or whatever, and you get like 20 minutes in, and it's like, wait a minute, we're doing Aliens again. Okay, I know everything that's going to happen for the next 4 hours. So it's that same, do you want the familiar or do you want the unexpected and exotic? But having characters in science fiction who are able to resolve problems using logic and problem solving and reasoning, those are strong shticks to have, as opposed to there's something mystical inside myself that only I understand, and that's why I can commune with what the monster is, and no one else can. There's a whole category of science fiction that's known as competence porn, where you have people who are very technical and very educated, and this is their chance to demonstrate like how thoroughly competent they are. And it doesn't matter whether it's science or like they're facing legal challenges or whatever. That's the sort of thing that meshes really well with a story like Alien set in a science fiction world. How's that?
There you go. Well, the other thing about Aliens is it shows you how all that high-tech weaponry and stuff that you associate with science fiction is kind of useless. It's not going to help you. You have to outwit this sort of thing. And even go back to the first Alien, which I believe it was Ridley Scott who described it, or maybe it was Dan O'Bannon. It's a haunted house set in space. So it's taking from an older genre and just putting it into a sci-fi setting on a spaceship, which I think a lot of very successful sci-fi kind of does at times. I mean, Star Wars, of course, is, taking old, myths, fairy tales and stuff and adding blasters and lightsabers to it and stuff, but it's still got the function of a lot of the old myths.
One of the things I like about aliens, though, as a science fiction, is that you're not afraid of the supernatural. You know this has a real cause. And that takes out some of the horror, but adds some of the horror. This thing isn't just evil because it's evil. It's hunting you for some reason. And you've got that as part of it as well. There's more deduction. There's more of a visceral reality to it because it is something that theoretically, if we're in space, could happen. We like to hope or hope not.
Right. It
So
makes it very scary.
I may, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's the ultimate predator, and that it was engineered for such.
It's not the ultimate predator. Predator is. Never mind.
Well, that's what Ash
Or
called it, the first film, in a sense. Now, there was ambiguity. Was it evolution that got it there? But the implication was that, no, something else, you made this thing. And that makes it even scarier in the science fiction thing, because, again, you're going back to Frankenstein and that somebody's own creation turned against him. And in the later film, one of the progenitors and stuff, Prometheus, you see that's exactly what happened. These are bioweapons that were created, and, oopsie, they didn't do what they were supposed to do.
I sensed the segue that I was looking for. I was also about to go back to Frankenstein because, once again, sometimes a monster story isn't primarily about the monster; it's about the people who are dealing with the monster, right? And so the original Alien, the story isn't just about what is this creepy thing going around killing people. It's a story about Ripley, right? And if there's a problem to be solved, I think the last time we had Alien Day and everyone was posting their alien memes up on Twitter and whatnot, there was the one person who observed that, Alien is a film that's really about Ripley, where you have the story where here's this woman who knows exactly what's going on, is trying to be rational and tell everyone how to solve this problem. And because of who she is, no one's listening to her. So here's an object lesson of, you could listen to the smart lady, or this thing is going to come through and kill everyone on the ship except the smart lady and her cat. And that's why it's such a great movie. So it's not so much about, here are the cool things that the alien can do. That's certainly a big part of it. But the real story is the people and how they react to these situations. And so in the same way, Frankenstein is about Frankenstein's creator reacting to his creation. There's a big part of the moral of Alien isn't be careful in space. It's listen to smart lady.
Yeah, but it's also how your own kind are turning against you too, and both, it's the company wanting to take this thing and turn it into a manipulable weapon. They wouldn't have gotten into that situation if the company hadn't sent them there, knowing full well.
Carter Burke is the real monster in Aliens. He's such a great NPC. He's so much fun to hate, and he's so easy to hate. And if you're a game master in a role-playing game, if you get to play a character like Carter Burke and be sufficiently oily, that's a good day.
Yep.
My Ducatos. The Caliph goes back to your template idea. Reanimation on Ungavorics, on the other hand, can be problematic. Dead carcasses seldom stay intact. In fact, I remember RuneQuest. You talk about the templates in D&D 3, which I think was a great addition. RuneQuest did this great similar thing. I remember they had a great troll zombie in one of theirs. It was just the toughest thing to possibly fight. Massively strong and couldn't really kill it. So, those sort of twists, mashups, and the like are so much fun. Which is a good way also to look at monsters in science fiction. Going back to Giger, look at all of his crazy creatures, and you wonder where they came from. And it wasn't just his drug-addled imagination, though that helped. It was certainly a lot of the mashups, and he talks about having worked with reptiles and insects to work those images into what he does. Where do the best monsters in science fiction come from? I mean, Alien is very humanoid to make it easy to go with the movies, but then we've got all these other wonderful ones in books.
Well, the interesting thing about the Alien in H.R. Geiger, or Giger, however it's pronounced, there's a psychologist, Stanislav Grof, who has this whole book and theory about how Giger's whole art and everything comes from birth trauma, and that it's a big examination of birth trauma, and that apparently he did have a very difficult birth. And so everything goes back to that sort of primal scream.
Caesarean sections have destroyed great artwork.
I'm going to say that one of the things I love about writing this type of story is that in order to identify with these monsters, in order to define these monsters, they're really reflections of us in a lot of ways. And so, often there is some aspect of human psychology that factors into, even when it's something as rational as monsters in science fiction. And speaking of science fiction, this is where I get to pull out this quote I like to pull out on various panels where advice from Robert Heinlein about writing monsters and other villains, that your enemy is never a villain in his own eyes. Keep this in mind. It may offer a way to make him your friend. If not, you can kill him without hate and quickly. And that's a touchstone that I keep going back to in writing antagonists and writing monsters, where there is a reason why the monster is doing what it does. And part of dealing with the monster is not just a fight scene where you bring out your weapons and roll dice and see how much damage you can do. You're looking for what's the reason why this is occurring and how can we solve this? And that makes an encounter deeper than that. As much as fun it is to kick in the door and like fight the orc who's in room 3, one of the things that monsters in science fiction are given a chance to do is to set up these situations, not just to see how the monsters act, but how the people react. So,
yeah, that's certainly what we've always felt. Nobody is the antagonist of their own story. Everyone is the protagonist of their own story, and all villains should be treated as such. But Brian, you touched on something that I was going to get to later, but I think is a very important way to think of monsters in science fiction. You talked about there being a solution to these. In classic horror, you're not necessarily looking for a solution. You're looking to destroy it, stop it, or get away from it. I mean, even the exorcist exorcising something isn't a solution. The enemy just goes away and will come back in another form, etc., etc. In science fiction, solving the monster is often an important point, and that's what Star Trek loved to do. You had this, oh goodness, why am I forgetting what their Blob episode was called?
Oh, the one with the space amoeba?
Yeah.
The Horta?
Pardon?
I was about to talk about the Horta, but that was one of the next ones. But let me pull up my notes here. You are talking about...
Bill and I are the ones who did the Star Trek games. We got to have Brian come in and tell us which episode.
I'm going to use my Google Food while you guys are talking.
It's one of my favorites. What was that, Brian?
Are you talking classic Trek or Next Generation?
Yeah,
we're talking classic Trek, the one where they face.
Of course, I'm talking classic Trek. Nothing occurred post the first movie. Sorry.
What? There were other Star Trek series?
What are you talking about? I think the one with the Horta is a good example of.
Hey, Beanborg. Welcome.
Yeah, I was going to say, the thing about the Horta. One more. Oh, do we have another special guest in the room?
No. I was just greeting someone in chat while you were looking.
Okay. So the thing about the Horta is that whole theme of it's important to understand the monster and why the monster does what it does. Like Devil in the Dark from the classic Star Trek is a perfect illustration of that concept, where you have this mining colony and a bunch of people are dying. And so someone calls in the crew of a starship to use all their brute force to come in and just kill it outright. And there's a point at which during the investigation where they find out that this isn't an unreasoning monster. This is a creature that's doing something for a very legitimate reason. And not only does it have reasoning, but it can communicate. You can negotiate with it. You can figure out how it thinks. And so there's a lot of these monster encounters where they start out being something like, this is a physical threat. We need to take the horror story solution, and either we're going to kill it or it's going to kill all of us. Turning it into the science fiction story. I mean, you can use problem solving in horror stories, but the classic Star Trek solution is we're going to figure out why this is going on. We're here to encounter new life forms, right? We're here to explore strange new worlds. Is there a way that we can solve this by talking to it instead of just obliterating it from orbit using the ship's phasers?
Yep. Star Trek did a great one where the Klingons and the Enterprise have to join up to laugh the villain off the starship when the villain's inciting them to violence. And I think it's Arena where Kirk battles the Gorn, and of course Adult Swim did a great send-up on that where Kirk gets space STDs and has to go back to tell all his lovers, and it ends with him having to go tell the Gorn.
So is the episode you're thinking about called Immunity Syndrome?
Is that the one where you got STDs?
No, that's the one where the Enterprise is in space and it encounters the giant space amoeba.
No, I was actually thinking of the one in the caverns, but that's fine too.
Okay.
Again,
that's another one where it's like we're in this situation, we're going to use science to solve the problem.
Right.
And then there's elaborate metaphor involving antimatter being similar to antibodies for this virus topical that's like threatening the ship. And so, It's another one where they run across the big spooky thing that's bigger than the ship in space, and they need to figure out a rational method of taking it down, because just blasting it over and over and over and over again is not going to work.
Wait a minute, Brian. You can't talk about metaphors today. That was yesterday.
Oh no! Am I here on the wrong day?
Metaphors be with you was yesterday.
Oh, that's right.
Today is Revenge of the Fifth. Don't you know
Today
that?
is Revenge of the Fifth. Yes.
Hey, Bill, this one's for you. Phantom Truth wants to know, is the gargoyle of nowhere a monster or environment, neither or both? And you can't just say it's a plot device.
Who knows? Nobody knows.
Yeah,
Seriously.
it's a plot device. No, wait.
Nobody knows.
Yeah, wait for War in the Heavens 3.
You'll have to decide for yourself for now. I was going to say about Star Trek, I've always felt one of the disappointing things is because so much of it was about, if you understand something, you can neutralize a threat and, make friends and stuff. But the Borg was the exception to that. They could never reason with the Borg. You could understand them, but they're never going to stop doing what they were going to do, and the only way they could stop them was to eventually blow them up. And I always felt that was a little disappointing, and I think that's one reason I've never been a big fan of the Borg. Although I do like how they're handled in the new Picard.
Right.
I was going to say that kind of takes a twist in Picard.
Yeah, it does. But it's still more of largely off stage as Borg. These are ones that are disconnected at that point. So it solves the problem simply by saying, well, they're not Borg anymore.
We're avoiding spoilers.
So I can't spoil things from Picard because not everyone has seen it. So I'm going to take a step back and go back to Next Generation. Mm-hmm. And there is an episode in which they encounter this lost Borg named Hugh.
Oh, yes, Hugh.
Right. And one of the things they find when they take him on the ship is they actually communicate with him instead of fighting him. Mm-hmm. And he's learning about the concept of individuality versus being part of a collective. So this might be headcanon on my part, but I think some Star Trek fans would agree with me on this, that one of the greatest weapons they had against the Borg was when Hugh decided to go back. And he had these concepts of individuality and individuation and rebellion, and went back into the collective and spread that idea, which is a rather dangerous idea for the Borg to have. So I can't spoil anything. I would expect to see Hugh come back like 10 or 20 years later, right, and see that the Borg have changed in part due to his influence of understanding how the enemy to him thinks and feels.
And I felt that was a great Star Trek thing, but they never really went anywhere with it. Instead, they had a movie where you introduce the Borg Queen, who's really just more of a nyar, ha ha ha, and you wind up just having to blow her up.
Well, they should do something with that on Picard. I think that'd be a great idea.
Keep an eye on Hugh's contract, the actor. But let's talk briefly about power levels in science fiction monsters. So this is an interesting thing. So on the low end, you've got husks and hull rats that sometimes just give PCs a chance to show off their combat skills. But then it goes up. And then going back to Star Trek, you've got things like Q, who are way off the power level. Got Borg, who are on the high level end of the power level. You've got creatures who are the equivalent of them. You've got creatures who are somewhat less. What is the secret for including those more powerful villains in a science fiction game without making the players feel helpless or like they need a deus ex machina to succeed? Because certainly the idea of angels in fantasy role-playing games are there, but there are rules for dealing with them and demons and so forth. Brian, you had something?
Well, I was going to say it's really tough because the concept of agency is so strong in a role-playing game, right?
Yeah.
If someone comes over to your house or like logs on your game on Roll20 and you present them with a creature, an encounter that's off the charts, and you want to show how powerful it is, by putting them in situations where they can't do anything and they get hurt by it over and over again, like that drama plays out really well on television. That drama plays out well when you're dealing with Q or Charlie X or Squire of Gothos or whatever incarnation of that archetype is there. But you're absolutely right that it has to play out differently in a role-playing game. And at this point, I hand it off to Bill.
Fading Suns, we kind of deal with it by making them more mysterious. The Vow are obviously way beyond human capabilities, but they stand off. They're offish. They don't, reveal what they're all about, and they're really there just on the side, more of an example to keep humans humble about what they're all about rather than to get in there and interfere. And when they do interfere, it's much more in a mysterious way that it's not so much that you're going up against them as they do something that initiates something and then other things happen. And so they're really still watching from the background.
So it's a situation where it's a test of how well you can react to its latest machination, and what you do to survive. And your act of defiance isn't attacking it. It's finding a way to endure and holding your ground.
Right. You're not going to get around with attacking it, and it's not actually going to be really necessarily getting involved in the process either. It's more just start the ball rolling on the whole thing, and now it's up to humans to do whatever the heck it is they started rolling the ball on.
Right, and we had a lot of fun with the Vow book because the Vow have limits in place on what they can do. And much of these are self-imposed limits, even though they feel that the universe is imposing these limits. And one of the great things about these uber-powerful villains in science fiction is they often have these weird limits. Q, again, is a great example of there are some weird limits in place with this thing who is seemingly limitless. In Fading Suns, a lot of your opponents seem a lot more powerful. I mean, that evil Emperor Alexius, you can't just pull out your rapier and do him in at the party like you should. Oh, sorry, I've been writing the Ducatos book. I apologize. But you can find their limits, and you're usually dealing with their deeds, their specific goals. Can you survive them trying to get their goals? Can you keep them from getting to their goals rather than confronting them directly? I had a lot of fun running Salandra Ducatos adventures because she wasn't going to sully her hands killing folks and just pissing off everybody. She would, if you were in part of her plots, you might stop her, but then she's looking to bring you into her fold through Selchaka addiction or something else. And the idea of the arch villain applies really well to these monsters with uber powers, to hold off in the background and let them build up in fear and terror while the PCs figure out how to deal with them. Adney Marcus notes something similar in chat, talking about the Borg. You hear about them more than you encounter them. I think that's often a good idea for these uber-powerful villains. Let them build up that foreboding. I mean, we have the whole idea of the Krakens in space. And, it's great. Anything I do in space, players immediately think it's a Kraken coming to get them. Until you actually have the Kraken attack. Not that they exist, Lord Urbian.
Well, I was kind of slowed down through the jump gate. I won't say too much about what happened, but now that I'm talking, you're going to need some repairs to my ship. I need to fuel up. We took quite a beating out there. Not to harp on the same point too much, but like in the story where there's the creature of ungodly power, a lot of the times the resolution comes from the fact that their godlike power has put them out of touch with what it means to be human, right? And the strength that the humans have at the lower end of the power scale is that they're in touch with emotions and feelings and concepts that you don't need when you're an indestructible godly being. And so even something, this is going to sound cheesy as hell, but this is how it plays out in classic Trek. Even something as simple as being able to laugh or looking at his power and mocking him, right? Or saying, you know what? We're not going to worship Adonis anymore. This is a goofy episode. We don't really need you anymore. Humanity has moved on. Just the monster, not only do the humans define the monster, but the monster defines the humans. And their humanity is part of the strength that often allows them to take out that greater foe.
Right, or you just use a logical paradox to make the computer spark.
Right.
Jack the Ripper.
Spock, you got this one, right?
Which is actually a rather empowering thing for a player character to just talk, and then all of a sudden the computer.
Well, it used to be like back when role-playing games were starting out and the mechanics weren't really sophisticated. Every once in a while, you get the DM who wants to set up the encounter like that. It's like, okay, there are two statues, and one of them tells the truth, and one of them lies. And like that kind of setup, that kind of logic puzzle doesn't need mechanics at all. But like, it works in Greek mythology, it works in classic Star Trek, it works in role-playing games in 2020. So people are people.
Yeah.
Phantom of Truth notes that that takes everything back to never seeing the actual monster, just its passing, talking about the uber powerful ones. But at some point, you have to confront the monster. I feel you got to really get like Two Gun right now has a whole tentacle in his airlock that got that slammed into the ship, and that's
Okay,
why
well,
he's having troubles.
I can only stay for about 10 more minutes because I really got to take care of this ship, guys. It's breaking inside right now.
It
I'm
just
hearing
turned out to really
sounds.
be Salandra Ducatos with some rubber tentacles on her ship.
So I'm just keep this handy just in case. Because obviously this is the cause of and solution to all my problems right here.
That's why you call
That's
you
the,
Two Gun.
that's the point of this discussion. Obviously, what I need is bigger guns to resolve this. It's not going to be my humanity or my sense of hope or anything like that. I was tempted at one point, like how far in this discussion to mention Lovecraft, but this is a science fiction discussion more than a horror story. Nonetheless, there's this whole legacy of
Lovecraft is
stories of
sci-fi. It
what's
is.
that?
Lovecraft is sci-fi.
Okay,
It's a
in the Walls of
post-Einsteinian
Eric's straight up
horror.
science fiction story,
As soon as you
right?
talk about non-Euclidean space, your suddenly can pretend to be science fiction.
And
You have
one
a
guy
bunch of
from Yaga.
hyper-educated academics using what they've learned through their studies to solve problems.
Yep.
So that's the same kind of arena where you're up against something that's off the scale, and the real heroism isn't necessarily defeating it. It's living to fight another day. It's getting some glimpse of the truth. It's you learning something from the encounter, even if it's something that mankind was not meant to know.
Now that's very satisfying in Call of Cthulhu, where you expect that. What about in other role-playing games? Is that something you're satisfied with in other role-playing games?
I think player expectations are important in a role-playing game. So you kind of need to go in at the start knowing what your game master is like, right? You kind of want to know at the outset, is this the game where we're going to get our ass kicked on a regular basis and we're going to consider it a victory if we don't all die? Or is this the game where we can expect to win and we'll get a reward for doing it? So it really depends on the game and the game master and the troupe, right? It's the troupe and the game master are collectively deciding what kind of story they want to tell.
What do you think, Bill? What does the GM have to do to effectively use monsters in a science fiction RPG?
Well, I mean, again, it depends on the RPG, but for Fading Suns, which, has a heavy adventure element, it's got to be something that can be defeated, even if you can't do it physically. There's got to be some way to overcome the problem. Because, I mean, that's one of the things in Fading Suns is humanity's whole history is of fucking things up, but then pulling their, fat out of the fire at the last minute times over and over and over. So even if there's a lot of carnage, there still needs to be some way come out victorious thing, even if coming out victorious just causes more problems in the long run.
Now that was something that was always fun in Pandemonium, was the lands would start opening up and weird things would come out for the players to deal with, and sometimes it could be just purely hack and slash, and other times it could be more mental or even spiritual. I had a lot of fun with the spiritual adventures. That's why we had the cathedral rising out there in the Badlands, unscathed, the symbol of hope in the terror.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, sometimes the villain just can be something fun for the players to pound on for a bit and show off against. And other times it can be that great mind twisting, fear inducing.
Yep, as the GM, you have to have a range of power level encounters ready to go. It's not just about the biggest and the baddest of the baddies you have to throw at them. You need to have a whole stack of lower level encounters so that, as Bill says, you're not just running encounters with Huss over and over again. You've got other minor physical challenges and other minor intellectual challenges that can keep them on their toes. So that you need to build up self-esteem by having a bunch of those lesser encounters that are easier to win, so that when they come up against the big bad, they've got a stronger sense of, okay, we've made it through all that, we can make it through this.
Eddie Marcus raises a great point in chat. What about the symbiotes? They're not solvable.
Or are they? I mean,
Or
so far
are they?
They're tough. I mean, We don't know their full secret. In the latest, advance of the meta plot, we know that Lady Theophane Al-Malik is believed to be dead, but her death seemed to coincide with some sort of thing that happened on Stigmata, to where now the eschatonics of the Manifest Light Legion seem to believe that the symbiotes are somewhat in retreat and that the World Egg might be dormant now.
World eggs. Eschatonic terraforming mumbo jumbo. No one believes in that stuff.
Well, they do when they're on Stigmata.
Counter to church teachings.
These are truly heretical musings.
Sorry, I've got my own monster currently dealing with the microphone. Yeah.
So yeah, the symbiotes as presented in the past, we didn't have a lot of ways to corner them in a sense, to put them off, but we'll be revisiting them, and certainly somebody seems to have found a way, even if nobody knows what happened yet.
Yeah, one of the great things about the symbiotes was that they could just be this inexorable force of doom taking over an entire planet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is more than aliens killing a few people in Stronghold, and maybe you could nuke them back to heck, but symbiotes are out to take over the entire world, and worlds beyond, and who knows what spores are lurking out on asteroids and rarely visited outer worlds and so forth in any system.
Right. Well, they've got that whole thing you get from 1950s Cold War paranoia too, of these things that might be among us, these pod people and stuff. And
well, that's right. We're going down the list of like classic horror and science fiction movies that have influenced these games, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers is very firmly on that list.
Yes.
Where again, it's the we've looked at the enemy and they're us kind of thing. It's another metaphor of this is a monster, but it reflects something in the human psyche. That the real danger here isn't necessarily what the monsters are doing. Well, I mean, they're replacing people with pod people, but our own paranoia is a greater threat to our survival than what these pod people are directly doing.
And the funny thing is, if you look at both of the versions of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers movies, the different eras give you different ideas of what everybody's afraid of. In the first one, it's the communists, thing. Everybody's a commie around us. But the 1970s, it was Est. And what is it doing to us? It's changing these people we know who take Est. And I don't recognize them anymore. What's going on?
There's this famous quote from William Gibson in a story called The Gernsback Continuum, where he basically says that there are a lot of writers science fiction writers who don't write about the future. They just put skins on the present. The stories that they're writing is really addressing stuff that's topical here in the here and now. Right. And in the same way, in a lot of these classic horror films and horror stories, it isn't necessarily about something that doesn't exist. It's about what are the conditions in the world that we have right now that lead us to fear that kind of external threat.
Right.
Well, the 2 minutes we have left, let's go ahead and analyze the most forward-thinking science fiction horror movie ever put together. Santa Claus versus the Martians.
Oh, hooray for Santa Claus. Hooray for Santa Claus. SANTLCLAUS. Hooray for Santa Claus. I think the really terrifying thing in that film, it's either the robot they have that's made out of a cardboard box that can't function properly, or Beppo, the Martian who wants to really be just like the human children and be able to play with toys. Like Beppo doesn't want to be a Martian. He wants to be Santa Claus. And he's just creepy.
I thought the old elder in the cave is pretty kind of scary.
Yes, the elder in the cave is an object lesson to us all, as is the scene where the machine that makes toys for children goes out of control and starts spewing toys all over the place, which I think is a metaphor for the rampant consumerism in our society. So really, this is a story that's a lesson to many different failings of our own society.
That's true. Don't rely on technology.
No, you can't rely on the machine that makes toys and the robot that delivers them. It really comes down to Santa Claus and his mystical powers that allow him to escape from airlocks.
Have faith in the
evade
saints.
Every trap for him on Mars.
Make sure if you're Dekados, follow Saint Nikolai.
Okay, so I'm going to work on my fanfic for Santa Claus versus the Dekados, and I'll have that ready by later tonight.
It's that consumerism that the Merchant League pushes that makes people weak.
Yeah, it's all the
Takes
guild's
away
fault.
their Martian powers.
Well, excellent. And thank you for joining us today, Brian. Great
You're
insights,
very
Two
welcome.
Gun.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for putting up for my slight cough and my numerous technical problems. But I assure you that I have some engineers who will look at this ship and get us flying straight again. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You made up for it with the beard.
Excellent. I'll keep growing it.
All right, for you in chat, I hope this was good. Go ahead and start putting in any ideas you would like us to cover in future weeks. Bill and I are talking about doing this perhaps every 2 weeks, maybe second and fourth week of a month, something along those lines in order to be consistent. But we can figure something out, or first and third, or something along those lines. But if you have ideas, other things you want to see, let us know. And I hope you're all starting to enjoy your own Fading Suns games now that you've got your hands on the PDFs of the books. Bill, anything else we should be expecting news-wise in the Fading Suns universe?
Oh, we'll roll it out when we need to. I'm sure. I can't say yet, but yeah, we'll let people know.
Sorry, I tried to get him to leak it. I did my best.
Ducados.
Ducados. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Ulysses International. We'll talk to you all later.
All right. See you then.
Bye.